Today we're uncovering the sweet treasures of Bordeaux, the botrytized beauties of Sauternes. Why should you be enjoying Sauternes? Well, there's at least 5 reasons. First, there's some amazing world-class wines, including some of the very best wines in the entire world. Second, at the moment, Sauternes is extremely out of favor. As a result, you can get some compelling values on Sauternes. In fact, the vast majority of the wines offer extreme value relative to the quality. The only wine that I would consider to be expensive as far as collectible wine goes is Chateau d'Yquem, and even Chateau d'Yquem offers relative value compared to other elite wines such as Salon Champagne or some high-end Burgundies, for example. Third, Sauternes becomes extremely special with age, and it can age effortlessly for decades. This also makes it an excellent choice for birth-year wines, particularly if you were born in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, or even 70s. It can be a challenge to find a red wine or a white wine, even from a top producer, that's still showing well. But with Sauternes, you don't need to worry about that, as there's some excellent expressions, even from the 1940s, that are still showing well today. Better still, you can source back vintages for a fairly reasonable cost, given the fact that Sauternes is out of vogue. Fourth, Sauternes is an excellent food companion. Certainly most people are familiar with the classic combinations such as foie gras, cheese at the end of the meal, or dessert, but there's many more pairings that work extremely well with Sauternes than just that. For example, roast chicken, veal, or pork dishes that have either some sweetness or some spiciness are ideal companions for Sauternes. In addition, Sauternes also works extremely well with seafood, particularly shellfish, such as lobster, crab, oysters, and clams. Japanese cuisine is also a perfect match for Sauternes. In fact, the last time I was in Bordeaux, we had a lunch and we had sweet wine paired throughout the entire meal, and it worked extraordinarily well. Fifth, Sauternes is also the perfect way to end a group wine tasting. So for example, when my friends and I get together with our tasting group, we'll oftentimes end the night with a bottle of Sauternes, and it's a perfect refreshing palate cleanser and an excellent way to end the evening. Now that you're hopefully persuaded to enjoy Sauternes, we're going to start out with a brief overview of the Sauternes appellation, and then I'm going to discuss some of my favorite producers of Sauternes. Sauternes is located in the southern part of Graves. Certainly the most famous wines from Sauternes, and those that we'll be focused on in this video, are the sweet wines that are made from grapes affected with botrytis, or so-called noble rot. The Barsac appellation is also wrapped up in this discussion, as producers from Barsac can label their wines either Sauternes or Barsac. Flavors and aromas for Sauternes typically include tropical fruit, honey, vanilla, and mixed spice. These wines tend to be a little bit full-bodied, and they're sweet, but this sweetness is well balanced by ample acidity, so they're not cloyingly sweet. This slide contains some additional basic facts regarding the Sauternes appellation. This information might be useful for those of you who are studying for wine certification exams, so definitely take a screenshot of it if you have an exam coming up. In terms of the grapes that go into Sauternes, you're typically talking about Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc. Semillon is typically the dominant grape and is often at least 80% or so of the blend. Some producers even use 100% Semillon. Where Sauvignon Blanc is included, that's oftentimes to increase the acidity of the blend. Muscadel is typically not used very frequently in Sauternes. Most producers will typically use that for their dry white wines. It takes a very special microclimate to be able to produce wine from botrytis-affected grapes. Sauternes is one of the very few places in the world that has this particular microclimate. Specifically, the conditions that are necessary to produce botrytis-affected grapes include alternating misty, humid mornings with dry, sunny afternoons. In Sauternes, these conditions are made possible by the humidity that's provided by the Landes forest, as well as the intersection of the very cold Ciron River and the warmer Garonne River. These factors combine to produce lots of mist and humidity, especially in the mornings, that helps lay the groundwork for the production of botrytis. In the afternoon, there's dry winds that come in from the east, and typically there's more sunny, warmer conditions in the afternoon that will help to dry up the humidity and prevent gray rot, which can ruin the grapes, and help to ensure that noble rot or botrytis sets in. I witnessed these conditions firsthand on my way to Sauternes last December. I had a 10 a.m. appointment, and on the way I encountered lots of humidity and mist. It looked kind of like fog. But by the end of my visit, conditions were sunny and pleasant, and even a little bit warm, certainly for December, and there was no sign of the humidity and mist that was present earlier in the day. Once the grapes are affected by botrytis, they turn brown, and the skins become permeable, which allows some of the water inside the grapes to evaporate. This concentrates the sugars, flavors, and aromas inside the grapes. There's a natural maceration that takes place, and the result is intensely concentrated flavors and aromas inside these grapes. And as you can tell by looking at the grapes, you're not able to get a whole lot of juice from these botrytis-affected grapes. That's one reason that yields are so low in Sauternes. Harvest for Sauternes is also a time-consuming and expensive process. There's typically a number of trained pickers that are required to go through the grapes and oftentimes harvest botrytis-affected grapes berry by berry. These harvesters have to be able to distinguish between botrytis or noble rot and gray rot. So the inclusion of gray rot impacted grapes in the Sauternes could ruin the wine. It's certainly not uncommon for the harvesters to have to go through the vineyard 5 or 6 different times just to complete the harvest. This process can take 6 to 8 weeks or more some vintages, so certainly a very expensive process to harvest Sauternes. Those interested in wine history and the 1855 classification of Bordeaux will be interested to learn that the 1855 classification also applied to Sauternes. In all, there's 27 classified producers of Sauternes, one of which stood alone at the top, and then there were 11 first gross and 15 second gross. In this video, we'll be focusing primarily on producers in the top 2 categories. Frederick Dard once aptly said, "I do not call yquem a wine because there are an infinite number of wines as such, but yquem is unique. I prefer the word nectar, the drink of the gods." While I'll do my best to explain what makes yquem special, even the most eloquent explanation does not do it justice. You simply have to experience it. If you haven't tried it yet, this should absolutely be on your bucket list. Yquem has been highly acclaimed for centuries. Even Thomas Jefferson, with his world-class palate, had several cases of it in his cellar. In 1855, yquem was so far ahead of its peers that it was awarded a classification all of its own. While some of the other Sauternes producers, especially those discussed in this video, make some outstanding world-class expressions of Sauternes, there's just no substitute for yquem. Yquem has more of everything. It's a truly elite world-class wine that's absolutely in a category all of its own. Unbelievably, yquem ages so well that it's even enjoyable in many instances after 100 years. While it's always a treat to taste yquem, and it's extremely enjoyable even in its youth, yquem truly distinguishes itself from its peers and becomes truly elite and life-changing with decades of age on it, preferably 30 or 40 years or more. For the first 25 years or so, flavors and aromas tend to be dominated by tropical fruit and honey. After about 25 years or so, the tropical fruit flavors begin to fade, and flavors and aromas such as creme brulee, caramel, and spice tend to take over. Some of my favorite older vintages of yquem include 1967, 1975, and 1988, 89, and 90. In the 2000s, it seems like the odd years have been very good for yquem. 2001 is a legendary vintage and one of the very best vintages of yquem ever produced. Standout vintages in the 2000s also include 2003, 5, 7, 9, 11, 15, and 17. And more recently, 2021 and 2022 are potentially epic vintages as well. Some compare those vintages favorably with the iconic 2001 vintage. In my experience, I found that yquem is a wine that is best shared with a larger group of 8 to 10 people or so. It's such a rich, sweet, concentrated wine that you don't really need that much of it to get the full experience. And by each contributing a pro rata share, you're oftentimes able to enjoy some epic vintages of yquem for as little as $50 to $60 per person. My group did this a few years ago with the 1967 vintage, which many people consider to be one of the top 3 or 4 vintages of yquem in the 1900s. Just to give you a feel for why I'm so excited about yquem, and this wine in particular, my tasting note read as follows. This wine was mind-bogglingly complex. Descriptors were too numerous to mention, but included apricot, peach, poached pear, quince, candied ginger, vanilla, cinnamon, praline, mandarin, orange, citron, orange peel, honey, toasted almonds, honeysuckle, blossom, and saffron. On the palate, this wine was simultaneously powerful yet delicate. The ample acidity provided tactile tension and perfectly balanced the sweetness. Just when you think you've experienced this wine at peak intensity, it continues to expand on your palate with unbelievable concentration of perfectly balanced flavors, sugars, and acidity. In France, they say it spreads like a peacock's tail. As you might expect, one of the reasons that yquem wines are so special is because they have probably the best terroir in Sauternes. They have vineyards that are located at the highest elevation in Sauternes, around 80 meters above sea level. On a 113-hectare estate, about 100 of those hectares are planted to vine. They have around 80% Semillon and 20% Sauvignon Blanc planted in their vineyards. The high elevation is beneficial because it facilitates the dry easterly winds that help to promote development of botrytis and prevent gray rot, and it's also beneficial in terms of drainage. The soils in the vineyard also help to distinguish yquem from some of the Sauternes produced by other producers. This is so because there's varying soil types that include clay, gravel, and sand over limestone. Some of the fruit from each of these different soil types is included in the final blend for yquem and helps to create wines of extra complexity. The winemaking process for yquem is also more elaborate and distinguishes it from a number of the other Sauternes producers. Specifically, following fermentation, they mature yquem in 100% new French oak for 30 months. This is both a higher percentage of new French oak and much longer barrel maturation than most other Sauternes. Even other high-quality producers typically use no more than 50% new French oak for maturation. Yquem typically isn't released until 4 to 5 years after the vintage. Nestled in the heart of Sauternes, Lafaurie-Peyraguey is more than a wine estate. It's a celebration of history, craftsmanship, and luxury. Lafaurie-Peyraguey's history dates back more than 4 centuries. It's classified as a first growth in the 1855 classification. This estate is now owned by Lalique, the famous crystal maker, and on site they have an impressive Relais and Chateau hotel with a Michelin 2-star restaurant in addition to the world-class winery. There's Lalique crystal everywhere, including the glasses for the tasting, the vases for the flowers, and even some of the trash containers. One of the highlights of the visit was absolutely touring the winery and seeing the special Lalique crystal barrel that was produced to celebrate their 400th anniversary and which holds an amazing 300 bottles of 2013 Sauternes. Lalique acquired this estate back in 2014 and quality has never been higher. Following the acquisition, they did a complete renovation of the cellars, and in addition, they did not renew their contracts for their sourced fruit. As a result, they're using only estate fruit to produce their wine, and they have much better control over the viticulture and the fruit sources. They use an incredibly strict selection, and only around 40% of the harvest makes it into the top wine. The rest is used for either their second wine or for one of their dry white wines. Lalique also came out with a new engraved logo for the bottle that makes it look like every bottle is itself a work of art. Lafaurie-Peyraguey Sauternes is dominant in Semillon, but they do include a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc, most vintages. They do not use Muscadel in their Sauternes. Due to the fact that quality has been trending higher recently, I definitely recommend some of the more recent vintages, such as 2017, 2021, and 2022. In fact, both 2021 and 2022 received at least 100-point score. The hard part now is actually finding these bottles, though. Unfortunately, especially since they did not renew their contract for sourced fruit, there's just not that much Sauternes being produced at Lafaurie-Peyraguey. And so for Sauternes and some of these top producers, it's definitely a good idea to consider buying wine futures. During the visit to Lafaurie-Peyraguey, they also were gracious enough to let me see the winery's cellar, which included a number of old treasures, including the 1895 Chateau d'Yquem, as well as the 1919 vintage of Lafaurie-Peyraguey. If you're in the Sauternes area, I highly recommend a visit to Lafaurie-Peyraguey. It's also a great place to stay and enjoy either lunch or dinner. Chateau de Fargues is a historic producer that traces its roots way back to 1472. Almost 3 centuries later, the owners of de Fargues acquired the legendary Chateau d'Yquem. As a result, de Fargues is made in the exact same way as Chateau d'Yquem. Interestingly, though, de Fargues did not produce Sauternes, a sweet wine, until the 1940s. Before that, they were focused on producing red Bordeaux wine. The owners ultimately sold yquem to LVMH in 2004 so that they could focus on the de Fargues brand. Quality has never been higher at de Fargues. If there were reclassification today, it would undoubtedly be classified as a first growth. Recently, for example, they completely overhauled the wine cellar. And so beginning with the 2021 vintage, the new wine cellar will be used to produce this wine. De Fargues has 18 hectares of vines planted to 80% Semillon and 20% Sauvignon Blanc. They have an extremely cool microclimate. As such, this is one of the last Sauternes producers to harvest their fruit. De Fargues has extremely low yields, and they typically produce only around 1,200 to 1,500 cases of this Sauternes per year. This is a wine that typically doesn't reach maturity until 12 to 30 years after harvest, depending on the vintage. While de Fargues is not as rich or age-worthy as yquem, particularly in its youth, it compares favorably to yquem, especially since they're made in the exact same way. So if you'd like to try a younger Sauternes that offers top quality for the price, I definitely think that it's a good idea to try some de Fargues. Next up is Chateau Climens. This is another first growth in the 1855 classification. This is another historic producer, and it traces its history way back to the 1500s. Climens is an excellent producer of Sauternes. It's known for making Sauternes with 100% Semillon. The vines average an impressive 35 years of age, and the soils are ideally suited to the production of high-quality Semillon, as they feature a mix of sand, limestone, and clay. Since 2011, Climens has been 100% biodynamic, and they received biodynamic certification in 2014. Climens matures its Sauternes in 35 to 45% New French oak, depending on the vintage, for around 20 to 24 months. They produce around 3,000 cases per year. Recently, however, Climens has unfortunately fallen on hard times, as from the period 2017 to 2021, they were only able to produce one vintage of Sauternes, that being the 2019. This is due to a number of problems with hail and frost in the vineyard, as well as the generally struggling marketplace for Sauternes. They have produced some dry white wine during some of those vintages, but again, they only produced the Sauternes in 2019. You definitely want to keep an eye out for Climens, however, in vintages like 2022 and some of their earlier vintages, as they make an excellent expression of Sauternes. Chateau Rieussec is another first growth in the 1855 classification for Sauternes. This property was acquired by the owners of Lafite Rothschild back in 1984. Following the acquisition, the new owners dramatically overhauled both the estate and the winemaking facilities. They also greatly expanded the vineyards from 40 hectares to around 85 hectares. Rieussec has great terroir, and it's located not far from Chateau d'Yquem. The vineyards are planted to 85% Semillon, 13% Sauvignon Blanc, and 2% Muscadel. The Rieussec vineyards span 2 different communes, which helps give the wines a little bit more complexity due to the differences in the terroir. Rieussec matures its wines in 50% New French oak for around 30 months. Rieussec is an extremely age-worthy wine. In fact, a few years ago, we had the 1961, and it was spectacular. The other thing I'll mention about Rieussec is that while all Sauternes tends to get darker with age, Rieussec tends to get a little bit darker than most. So don't be concerned by that, as it's definitely normal for this producer. Chateau Suduiraut is another estate that's classified as a first growth in the Sauternes classification for 1855. This is another producer that's also located fairly close to Chateau d'Yquem. Interestingly, the grounds at this estate were produced by the same designer that produced the gardens at Versailles. So definitely very impressive gardens at Chateau Suduiraut. Suduiraut underwent a change in ownership back in 1992, and the quality has definitely gotten better since that time. This is a wine that struggled particularly from the 1940s through the 1960s. Quality has definitely gone up a notch since probably around the 2000-2001 vintage. The good thing is you can buy some back vintages of Suduiraut, such as 2001 and 2005, for fairly reasonable prices. Certainly the newer releases are extremely attractive on a price-to-quality basis as well. Suduiraut has around 90 hectares of vines that are planted to 88% Semillon and 12% Sauvignon Blanc. Suduiraut vinifies its Sauternes in oak and matures its wines in 50% new French oak for around 18 to 24 months. Sometimes they also produce a very special bottling that's called Cuvée Madame and has much higher sugar levels. Other producers that make wines that I've enjoyed include Chateau Guiraud, which tends to produce a wine that has a little bit more Sauvignon Blanc in it, typically 35 to 40% or so. As such, it tends to have a little bit more acidity and freshness and not be quite as sweet as some other Sauternes. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, you might want to give Chateau Guiraud a try. Additionally, I really enjoy the wines from Chateau Gilette. I've had some very old expressions, even from the 1950s and 60s, and they've held up remarkably well. So if you get a chance to find an older bottling, you may want to take a flyer on it. But just to be clear, some of the best vintages for Sauternes across the board in the last 20 to 25 years include 2001, 2005, 2009, and 2017. I also think that 2021 and 2022 will be at that same level as well. In addition, you can't go wrong with vintages like 2015 and 2016 that are quite strong generally as well. 2022 is shaping up to be a legendary vintage in Bordeaux. If you'd like to learn more about my thoughts regarding that exceptional vintage and some of the wines that are standouts, please be sure to check out this video that's linked above.